Contrarian Overproduction. Autist in the front, shaman in back. Today, I'll start at the end by sharing two quotes which touch on my conclusion and takeaway, and then I'll retrace the meanderings by which I found my way there. The first quote comes from a post by Dan Williams, The Marketplace of Good and Bad Ideas, on why the free exchange of ideas is a complex breeding ground for truth, appealing falsehoods, and self-serving rationalizations. Quote, "Lots of bad ideas emerge, not through top-down attempts to manipulate audiences, but from competition to win attention, respect, and trust from audiences who reward content that aligns with their mistaken intuitions. Moreover, because the ideas are fundamentally untestable for the audiences involved, they are never in a position to learn that the information they are acquiring is such low quality." Close quote. The other quote comes from John Carter, author of the Postcards from Barsoom Substack. His recent post, An Immolationist in Chapel Perilous, Please Don't Burn Yourself Alive, included the following helpful advice. Quote, "The most important thing, I think, is epistemic. Don't get too wrapped up in any one narrative. Don't become too emotionally invested in any one specific thing as the truth. Emphasize the question over the answer, adopting the zetetic stance in which ontological ambiguity is not the problem but the point. Maintaining an emotional distance from any given narrative or truth claim that comes your way, treating it like a radioactive spent fuel rod, holding it at arm's length behind lead shielding, this, I think, can go a long way to keep from getting sickened by meme poisoning." Close quote. I started my morning Substack reading with Losing Faith in Contrarianism. There are institutional incentives that make contrarian views that catch on mostly wrong, by Bentham's Bulldog. It's not as quotable as the other two posts I've already referenced, so I'll be summarizing, but Bulldog did provide one standout meme, the obsessive, high IQ autist who is willing to read a truly mind-boggling amount of boring academic literature on a topic. Bulldog describes how he has come to discount the pronouncements, no matter how entertaining, of contrarian public intellectuals when their conclusions run counter to those of the obsessive autists. I've written and spoken at length about how I got taken in by the peak oil, fast collapse, doomer narrative which dominated the high water years of the C-Realm podcast. I'm not only familiar with the people who can spin a compelling contrarian rap that sounds rigorous and erudite, I know them in real life. One of them bore a striking resemblance to my younger self. I have intimate experience with this subject matter. Bulldog describes a very readable and entertaining book by some high-profile public intellectual, arguing that education doesn't build human capital by imbuing students with skills they aren't likely to get elsewhere. Instead, this contrarian public intellectual argues that education merely identifies the people who already possess the native intelligence and the commitment required to gain a university degree. The obsessive, high IQ autists dug into the extensive research on this topic and reached the opposite conclusion, says Bulldog. Still, the autists usually lack the communicative elan of a successful contrarian public intellectual, and so the position of the entertaining contrarian is more likely to find its way into the minds and opinions of smart, book-reading people who are not the sort of obsessive autists willing to read thousands of pages of boring academic research. Now to Peter Turchin, an author and researcher whose books I have not read. I've listened to podcast interviews with Turchin and read, listened to, and watched other people's presentations of his ideas, but I haven't actually read his work for myself, so I realize that I may not grok his point as well as I think I do. That said, when I hear Turchin's name, the first thing that comes to mind is the idea of elite overproduction. In a nutshell, when a society produces more aspiring elites than there are available elite positions, it results in intra-elite conflict, demagoguery, and populism. Elite overproduction happens differently depending on social and historical context, but for our purposes, it is the inevitable result of the conventional wisdom that everyone needs to go to college in order to avoid a life of low-paid, low-status drudgery. Dramatically increasing the portion of the population with university degrees does not automatically increase the availability of elite positions that require those sorts of credentials. The upshot is baristas with law degrees. Question: what's worse than toiling away in a low-pay, low-status service sector job? Answer: working